America is stuck on stupid, selfish, greedy, unwise, and wrong because no one in America is significantly or sufficiently concerned with right. Rape proves my point. Why do we have so many rapes in America? On top of all the coerced and conditioned forms of sex that wouldn't otherwise occur if people had a higher understanding, consciousness, awareness, and ability to sense things. Well, because people are selfish. One cannot look past how they feel. Rape feels good. Does that make it good? Rape can even feel right to the rapist. Does that make it good? When the rapist begins the rape, why doesn't he stop? He says, well, I've gone this far. Why should I stop now? I may as well finish it. If one were to use reason, rationalism, enlightenment, functionalism, and pragmatism, they would allow for a rape culture indefinitely because it is a necessary evil that complements the system and allows the system to coerce and force and threaten. You're going to go to jail and be raped. We're going to send you back to the ghetto as, stigmatized with mental illness, and no one will believe you when you're raped. We will use rape as a form of torture, like in the Phoenix program, Abu Ghraib, and, Guantanamo Bay, and so on. It takes a higher ability to sense to understand why it is wrong, which definitively proves my argument from a moral standpoint, which should really be the only standpoint one takes in a civilized society, as to why the martial artist is the natural leader. He refines his senses, and he is more wise than the pragmatist, the scientist, etc. They lack the heart and the ability to perceive truth and to specifically sense truth. It is our senses that tells us it is wrong when we see the true suffering in society when one is raped. Only when someone dulls the senses of someone like me do they stumble in any kind of way, really. And that goes back to society needs to get together and love and respect the Pharaoh, or else he would do things that he wouldn't otherwise do. And we see this with mental health, drugging people and then becoming school shooters and so on. It is not before they start taking drugs, but after. It is not before they are provoked by the psychological construct and the environment of this depraved, pansexual Greco-Roman society that they commit these atrocious and deplorable acts, but it is after. Now let's look at the root of this. What is the root of our culture? Well, Western culture starts with kind of barbarism, cults. But before that, it is a basic level of coerced sex, convinced sex, rape, and monetary control. Control of food and trade that leads to the propaganda. We need to spread this propaganda and communicate it to people, which then led to their choice in cults and mythological societies, if you will, which then you get the Greek philosophers challenging the traditional myths for their own self-gain. They're not high moral characters. They're homosexuals and pedophiles, and their logic is not based on a higher martial arts morality, but what is beneficial to the individual and disturbing ideas of what freedom should be. Freedom from morality itself, really. And that led to psychology, which is a branch of philosophy, which then led to psychiatry, drugging people. On top of that, going back to the mythology. So psychology and psychiatry are just basically variations of mythology, which then leads to the culture. The culture cannot exist completely adverse to psychiatry. We do not have psychiatry as the only reasonable science, the only reasonable form of thought, school of thought, battling this hugely, this immoral culture. No, psychiatry has always persecuted the righteous, the whistleblowers, the political dissidents. It has never understood nature versus nurture, nor has it ever accurately even begun to describe the nature of reality. So how could it? So psychiatry itself is immoral. It is wrong. We're going to force you to do it our way, and our way includes, disproportionate sex offenders on our side, be it the military, law enforcement, be it, psychiatrists themselves, mental health workers themselves. And of course, this molds the culture. Psychiatry is a tool, a mechanism, probably the most effective one to mold the culture. The propaganda is just nonsense without the use of force and the use of psychiatry and drugging and coercion to create the culture. So then from there, you get your personal choices, and they're based on financial, social, sexual, and political beliefs and, and gains and so on. All right? So it's very simple. There's no room for debate. When we move on, we get the mindfulness, mind your manners, mind yourself, right? And this goes back to being a man versus being a boy. Being a man is concerned with what is right, moral, honorable, valorous, chivalrous, ethical, true. What is dignified? What is mature? Versus conformity and gain, which is immature. Fighting over toys, etc. So when you see disease, poverty, sexual immorality as it relates to reproduction and intellect, these are eugenic philosophies. And eugenics obviously is derived from this same basic kind of coerced sex, convinced sex, rape, and monetary control society. When you look at the Greek mythology, it proves my point. All Poseidon, Mars, Greek and Roman mythology, Poseidon, Mars, Jupiter, they're all rapists. Read between the lines, the rape of the Sabines, they're all rapists. So what is the main message of Christianity? It is the crucifixion of those who follow higher morality, which is mostly embodied by the sun. And there is actually spiritual power that comes from the sun. It is felt, it is intense, it is powerful. Everything else is lukewarm nonsense. Stars drop out of the sky all the time. Arguably, all the planets and the moon can go away, and it won't have as much of an effect, to say the least, than if the sun burnt out. Then certainly we would be destroyed almost immediately. So life and death, marshaling the stars, I've gone over this. I've beaten this like a dead horse time and time again. So now that we've covered that, let's look at how should this thing play out. Well, the moral standpoint, the only standpoint that should really count, there is no relativism here. It is straightforward. Who does this culture benefit? These are the most guilty people. For the same reason you say the 99% against the 1%. Because they benefit the most from this society. Certainly, you all realize that you're all guilty to some degree, unless you are in complete rebellion out of sacred morality, which is seen as extreme and fanatical. And since you're Western bitches, you won't go there, right? So who does it benefit the most? The white, the Jew, and the Asian elite. And they give their people a makeover. So by default, they should forfeit all leadership positions, positions of respect, and spiritual leadership positions especially, with an emphasis on moral leadership in a society that should be controlled by people of higher morality. By default, boom. If they have any honor, they will forfeit this. There's no question to that at all. There's no question here. Your society comes from you. You have brought us to this despicable point. You have given your people all the advantages so they can continue this disgrace in the name of their own people. Even Tim Wise had the honor to say that he's not the best person for this job because he comes from the privileged, benefiting class when he talks about white privilege. Okay, so obviously by default, it must be somebody who doesn't benefit. But then before all you black and all the other minorities people get, well, what about me? I'm a good Mason House nigga. The token minority and the rich also benefit from this. By default, they should be discarded. If you have any honor, the scientific minority who's rich, the token minority celebrity and so on, you should be discarded. You're like the Hollywood stars covering up pedophilia for self-gain, pedophilia as one of the most deplorable forms of rape. Okay? The rape of these movie stars that's covered up. Then there's the managerial Mason class. You're benefiting from it. Of course, you should be removed from all leadership. But it is impossible to be moral for any of these groups to have a leadership position or a position of spiritual power, and to be moral. Everyone who rolls with it, no servant can be greater. None of you deserve that. When you finally narrow it down, it narrows it down to me. I'm the only one in complete defiance. My videos all over the internet highlight that fact. The nature of my videos. If you notice, the Pan-African flag is gone because when I thought about it, I said, well, pansexual, And of course, I'm not a figure in the Pan-African movement. I'm just somebody who stands in solidarity with African people. When I thought about the deeper implications of the sun not being on the flag, and I've gone over this before, I finally decided to just take it down. It's symbolic of, I don't take any sides with race. This is a matter of the sun itself, right and wrong. Why isn't the sun lighting the black on the Biafran flag? Because Igbos themselves, to a certain degree, are also defying God, and they don't accept the sun as they later, and they accept white supremacy and the white power structure and the token minorities as their leaders. So, when you look at this thing, it does not take a genius to see that we live in a society that can't even admit the civilization and martial arts comes from black African people. And it has to do with senses and mind, body, soul, and cultivating this over generations. You can't even admit that. You want to start it with whites or Asians or even perhaps Arabs. These people are simply not coordinated enough naturally before technology, before drugs, to make that claim. It is like saying snakes are the first animals, and snakes are the best at flying. Snakes are the birds. They have been cultivating this ground-crawling, venomous culture for a long time. They don't know how to fly. Horse is the skywalker. Skywalker. Moving the feet and maneuvering like a black basketball player. Skywalking, maneuvering for maneuverability for precision strikes. And that goes back to the gatekeeper. He keeps the spirit in himself. He guards it, sparring, coordinating the spirit. He is the best, most intense spiritual guardian. Therefore, he is the gatekeeper, not some Cerebus, the son of Typhoon, and a half beautiful woman, half serpent mother, guarding the underworld. Right? The underworld is hell. It is guarded by a rapist. It is controlled by a rapist, Hades, which is an aspect of Zeus. Ra has one aspect expressed through man, and that is Haru, the top martial artist, the gatekeeper. There is no other way it could be. Everything is a reaction to this, using drugs, illusion, control of monetary control, coerced sex, convinced sex, and rape, applying these things in different ways for different people and different groups to then achieve this despicable end. The end does nowhere near justifies the means, nowhere near morally from any moral standpoint. It is despicable, it is unforgivable, and you all are unwise. You have bet everything against God. You are a bunch of bitches that believe in science. Science departments cannot define the nature of God. They have generations of supporting propaganda for a rapist pedophile elite. They don't understand. We can study the nature of this thing spontaneously. It doesn't matter. All that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how much you study the sun and hydrocarbons and atoms and protons, neutrons, electrons, etc. It does not matter. You are liars and your lens is false. You cannot walk into a room blindfolded and accurately describe things. You have to have a higher ability to sense them. You are people that justify rape with reason, pragmatism, rationalism, illuminism, and other forms of nonsense. You have no right to speak about God or to pretend that you're holy. And yes, I will close the gate. I am the gatekeeper. And if you do not understand that, put your hand over your mouth and never, ever speak on religion again.